The Zephyrian Confederacy had been the galaxy's golden children for over 3,000 years. Picture the most advanced civilization you can imagine, then multiply it by 10. Their cities floated among the stars like jewel crowns, connected by bridges of pure light. Every problem they faced got solved with either their incredible technology or their famous diplomatic skills. War was something they read about in ancient history books, not something that happened to civilized people. Captain Veltar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Harmony, watching the morning sun rise over his homeworld of Zephyr Prime. The planet below looked like a paradise made real, with crystal spires reaching into cloud-covered skies and oceans that sparkled like liquid diamonds. His people had built this perfect world through centuries of careful planning and peaceful cooperation. They were proud of what they had accomplished, and they had every right to be. But pride, as they say, comes before the fall. The first reports came in as whispers. Deep space monitoring stations picked up strange readings from the galactic rim, ships going missing near the outer colonies, entire research outposts suddenly going silent without any distress calls. The Confederacy scientists studied the data with mild curiosity, assuming they were dealing with some natural phenomenon or perhaps a new form of space storm. They were so very wrong. The Vex came like a plague of metal locusts. These weren't your typical alien invaders with grand speeches about conquest or demands for surrender. No, the Vex were something far worse, something that didn't even recognize other life forms as worthy of communication. They were silicon-based creatures that had evolved in the cold depths between stars, feeding on rare minerals and energy sources. To them, inhabited planets weren't homes filled with living beings. They were just really convenient buffets. Captain Veltar received the first real warning when Colony 7 went dark. Not just communications down or power failures, but completely and utterly silent. When the rescue ships arrived, they found nothing. No buildings, no people, no trace that millions of Zephyrians had ever lived there. Even the ground had been stripped clean, leaving behind only bare rock scarred with strange geometric patterns. The Confederacy's leaders called emergency sessions. Their greatest minds gathered in gleaming council chambers, debating and theorizing about this new threat. Some suggested it might be an unknown natural disaster. Others proposed that a rogue artificial intelligence had somehow gained control of advanced mining equipment. A few even wondered if this could be the work of some previously unknown species testing their defenses. None of them guessed the horrible truth until it was far too late. The Vex moved through Confederacy space like a terrible tide. They consumed everything in their path with mechanical efficiency that would have been almost beautiful if it wasn't so absolutely terrifying. Planets that had stood for millennia disappeared in a matter of days. The creatures worked in perfect coordination, their silicon bodies shifting and reforming as needed, turned themselves into whatever tools the job required. When the Confederacy finally tried their traditional diplomatic approach, sending peace envoys with offers of negotiation and cultural exchange, the Vex didn't even pause to consider the proposal. The envoys and their ships simply vanished, absorbed into the swarm like drops of water falling into an ocean. Captain Veltar watched 12 core worlds fall in 12 days. Each one had been home to billions of his people. Each one had contained thousands of years of art, culture, and scientific achievement. Each one died the same way, stripped clean and left as empty rock floating in space. Standing on his bridge as the 13th world began to scream its final distress calls, Veltar realized that his people faced complete extinction. Their plasma shields were useless against creatures that absorbed energy. Their diplomatic skills meant nothing to beings that didn't recognize other life as worthy of consideration. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Confederacy found itself facing a problem they couldn't solve. In their desperation, they did something they had never done before. They admitted they needed help. The Confederacy's most powerful transmitters began broadcasting a simple message into the depths of space. A plea for aid sent to anyone who might be listening. Most of the galaxy's remaining species assumed they were hearing the death song of another civilization about to join the growing list of the Vex victims. Admiral Torres had been staring at the tactical display for 18 hours straight, watching red dots multiply across the screen like some kind of deadly infection. The Vex swarm had completely surrounded Kepler Prime, one of the Confederacy's most important industrial worlds. 50 million people lived on that planet, and Torres knew he didn't have nearly enough firepower to save them. His fleet hung in space like expensive jewelry about to be fed into a meat grinder. Every ship represented centuries of advanced engineering and elegant design. Their hulls gleamed with polished metal and energy field generators. The crews inside were the best the Confederacy had to offer, trained from birth in the arts of space combat and diplomatic resolution. Fat lot of good any of that was doing them now. Torres rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the casualty reports again. The numbers kept climbing. The Vex didn't just destroy ships, they consumed them completely, breaking down every molecule for raw materials. It was like fighting an enemy that got stronger every time you lost a battle. The communication officer suddenly straightened at her station. "Admiral, we're getting new contacts dropping out of hyperspace. 3 ships, bearing 27 Mark IV. Torres felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the reinforcements from the core worlds had finally arrived. He turned to the main view screen, expecting to see the graceful curves of Confederacy battleships emerging from the swirling tunnel of hyperspace. What he saw instead made him wonder if he was having some kind of stress-induced hallucination. 3 objects tumbled out of hyperspace like chunks of scrap metal someone had welded together in their garage. They weren't ships so much as they were flying boxes with engines stuck on the back. The hulls looked thick and crude, covering what appeared to be actual rivets. Actual rivets, like something from the Stone Age of space travel. Torres squinted at the readings his sensors were providing. Are those chemical rockets? His tactical officer checked the data twice before responding. Yes, sir. Chemical propulsion systems. No energy shields detected. Hull composition appears to be basic steel alloys with some kind of ceramic plating. The Admiral almost laughed out loud. These primitive ships had wandered into one of the most dangerous battlefields in the galaxy. Their crews were probably some lost exploration team that had gotten turned around in hyperspace. The kindest thing he could do would be to send them away before the Vex noticed them. Unknown vessels. Torres transmitted on standard diplomatic frequencies. This is Admiral Torres of the Confederacy Defense Fleet. You have entered a restricted combat zone. For your own safety, please withdraw immediately. We're engaged with a hostile force that poses extreme danger to all spacecraft. The response came back in a language his computers recognized as an ancient dialect from the Galactic Rim, but with an accent he had never heard before. The voice was calm, almost casual, like someone asking for directions to the local shopping center. Copy that, Admiral Torres. This is Captain Jake Miller of the United Earthship Defiance. We received your distress signal about 47 days ago. Sorry it took us so long to get here, but we had to stop for supplies. Earth? Torres ran the name through his memory banks. There was a system called Sol somewhere out in the galactic backwaters, listed in most databases as Deathworld, extreme hazard, approach not recommended. The planet called Earth was supposedly covered in deadly weather, toxic atmosphere, and gravitational fields that would crush most civilized species. Before Torres could respond, the primitive ships opened fire. What happened next defied everything Torres thought he knew about physics. Streams of solid projectiles erupted from the human ships at velocities that should have been impossible for such crude technology. But it wasn't just the speed that shocked him, it was what those projectiles did when they hit their targets. The Vex bioforms, creatures that had shrugged off the Confederacy's most advanced plasma weapons, simply came apart. Chunks of silicon and metal sprayed in all directions as the human weapons tore through them like they were made of paper. In 30 seconds of continuous fire, the 3 human ships destroyed more Vex creatures than Torres's entire fleet had managed in the past 6 hours. The tactical displays started changing so fast that his computers could barely keep up. Red dots representing Vex forces began disappearing at an alarming rate as the humans pressed their attack. These weren't careful, measured strikes designed to minimize casualties and preserve diplomatic options. This was something Torres had only read about in historical accounts of ancient wars. Admiral, Captain Miller's voice came through the comm system again, still maintaining that weirdly casual tone. We got your message about needing help. Point us toward the biggest concentration of these bug things, and we'll start clearing them out. Torres stared at his view screen in complete bewilderment as the three primitive human ships carved through the Vex swarm like apex predators that had just found their favorite prey. The first thing that struck Admiral Torres about human combat tactics was how completely insane they seemed. Captain Amy Chen's ship, the UES Wolverine, took a direct hit from a Vex plasma cannon that should have vaporized her entire crew. Instead of retreating or calling for medical evacuation, Chen just laughed over the radio and said, "Well, that stung a bit," before ramming her damaged vessel straight into the side of a Vex bioship at maximum velocity. Torres watched his instruments in disbelief as the collision registered on his sensors. The impact should have killed everyone aboard the Wolverine instantly. The G-forces alone would have liquefied any normal species. But somehow, impossibly, Chen's voice came crackling through the static moments later. "This is Wolverine Actual. We're inside the target now, beginning interior operations. Tommy, grab the big guns from storage. Bill, you're with me on point. Let's show these things how we handle uninvited guests back home." The concept of ramming enemy vessels and then surviving the fight inside them was so foreign to Confederacy doctrine that Torres had to check his tactical manuals 3 times to make sure he wasn't misunderstanding something fundamental about space combat. His people fought from a distance, using precise energy weapons and careful maneuvering to avoid casualties. The idea of deliberately crashing into your enemy and then getting out to fight them face to face seemed like something from a barbarian fantasy story. But it was working. Somehow, impossibly, it was working better than anything Confederacy had tried. Commander Tom Bradley's ship, the UES Thunderstrike, demonstrated another uniquely human approach to the problem. Instead of trying to disable Vex vessels with surgical precision, Bradley simply flew his ship in close and started shooting everything that moved with weapons that made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. "What are those projectile weapons?" Torres asked the science officer, staring at the streams of metal flying from the human ships. They appear to be chemically propelled solid rounds. "Sir, basically chunks of metal fired by controlled explosions. It's incredibly primitive technology, but they're firing them at enormous velocities." The Vex had evolved over millions of years to counter the energy-based weapons that most civilized species used. Their silicon-based biology could absorb plasma bolts, deflect laser beams, and even redirect particle streams back at their attackers. They were living shields designed to be nearly invulnerable to anything the galaxy could throw at them. Nobody had bothered to tell them about bullets. Lieutenant Kate Rodriguez was the first human to actually board a Vex hive ship and live to tell about it. Her assault shuttle punched through the creature's outer hull like it was made of tissue paper, and she led her squad into the twisting organic corridors with a confidence that amazed the Confederacy observers watching through drone feeds. "Holy cow, these things are uglier up close," Kate called her squad as they moved deeper into the ship. Her rifle chattered constantly, spitting out round after round of ammunition that tore through Vex defensive forms like they were made of cardboard. "Danny, you seeing this? These bug things have got some serious personal space issues." Sergeant Danny Walsh kicked down something that might have been a door and tossed a grenade into the chamber beyond. "Tell me about it, Lieutenant. My grandmother's basement was cleaner than this place, and she kept 17 cats." The casual banter between the human soldiers was perhaps the most shocking thing of all to the Confederacy forces listening in. These people were fighting through a nightmare maze of hostile alien technology, facing creatures that had destroyed entire civilizations, and they were joking around like they were cleaning out a garage. Torres watched Kate's squad methodically clear room after room of the Vex ship. The humans moved with practiced efficiency, covering each other's movements and communicating in a kind of informal shorthand that spoke of long experience fighting together. They treated obstacles that would have stopped a Confederacy boarding party as minor inconveniences to be blasted through or climbed over. "Contact left," Danny called out, raising his weapon toward a cluster of Vex repair drones. "Kate, you want the honors, or should I?" "All yours, Sergeant. I'm busy with this computer thing over here." The sound of gunfire echoed through the ship's corridors as Danny eliminated the threat with casual precision. Meanwhile, Kate was somehow interfacing with Vex technology, using nothing more sophisticated than a crowbar and what appeared to be a very bad attitude. Within 2 hours, the humans had completely cleared the hive ship and were calling for pickup. They emerged from the alien vessel covered in strange fluids and carrying trophies that made Torres' stomach turn. But they were all smiling like they had just completed some kind of fun training exercise. Another successful pest control operation. Kate reported to her captain. Ship secure, but you might want to send a cleaning crew. These things really don't believe in proper hygiene. The Confederacy had spent months trying to understand Vex technology and biology. The humans had figured it out in an afternoon and made it look easy. Once the humans figured out how the Vex operated, they stopped playing by anyone else's rules and started writing their own. Captain Lisa Chin was the first to notice something that had escaped every Confederacy scientist for months. While studying the tactical displays during a brief ceasefire, she pointed at a cluster of smaller Vex ships hanging back from the main battle. "Look at those little ones," she said to Admiral Torres during their first joint strategy meeting. "They're not fighting. They're just sitting there, all protected and safe. Want to bet that's where they keep their babies." The Confederacy officers looked horrified at the suggestion. Targeting non-combatant vessels went against every rule of civilized warfare they had ever learned. But Lisa just shrugged and checked her ammunition supplies. "Back on Earth, we learned a long time ago that the best way to stop a pest problem is to go after their breeding grounds. You don't just swat the flies you can see. You find their eggs and take care of the problem at the source." Torres tried to explain the diplomatic implications, but Lisa was already giving orders to her weapons crews. Her ship, the U.S. Determination, broke formation and headed straight for the Vex nursery cluster. The results were immediate and devastating. The moment Lisa's weapons started hitting the smaller vessels, something changed in a way the Vex swarm moved. Their perfect coordination faltered. Ships that had been moving in flawless formation suddenly started bumping into each other. Attack patterns that had been mathematically precise became sloppy and confused. "I think we just made them angry," Lisa reported with obvious satisfaction. Really, really angry. But it wasn't anger the humans had provoked. It was something much worse for a hive mind species. It was panic. Commander Rick Barnes took things in a completely different direction. While the other human captains focused on conventional tactics, Rick had been studying the frequencies the Vex used to coordinate their movements. Being a former communications specialist who had spent years working with radio equipment, he recognized the patterns better than most. "It's like a really complicated song," he explained to his confused crew. "They're all singing together to stay in sync. But what happens if we teach them a different tune?" Rick started broadcasting on the same frequencies the Vex used, but instead of trying to jam their signals, he did something nobody expected. He started reciting poetry. Not just any poetry, but the most aggressive, confrontational verses he could remember from his college literature classes, mixed with some creative additions of his own. "Roses are red, violets are blue. You picked the wrong planet, and now we're coming for you." Rick broadcast on 17 different Vex communication channels simultaneously. The effect was like throwing a wrench into a finely tuned machine. The Vex hive mind, which had operated flawlessly for millions of years, suddenly found itself trying to process contradictory information. Their shared consciousness began developing what could only be described as a severe headache. Major Bob Harrison watched the tactical displays with growing amazement as the Vex swarm started making mistakes that defied all previous observations of their behavior. Ships crashed into asteroids they should have easily avoided. Attack formations fell apart in the middle of battle. Some Vex vessels even started firing on their own allies. "I've been studying these things since they first showed up," Bob explained to a gathering of Confederacy commanders, "and I think I finally understand what we're dealing with. The Vex are like one giant computer made up of millions of individual parts. They work perfectly as long as everything goes according to their programming. But they've never had to deal with an enemy that doesn't follow any logical pattern." He pointed to a display showing human battle formations, which looked like complete chaos compared to neat geometric patterns the Confederacy preferred. "Look at how we fight. We don't have a grand strategy or a master plan. Every captain makes their own decisions based on what they think will work best in that moment. From the Vex perspective, we're completely unpredictable. The humans had turned unpredictability into an art form. Captain Jenny Walsh would suddenly decide to retreat from a winning battle, only to come back 5 minutes later from a completely different angle. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Murphy made his crews practice maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat, like flying in spirals or doing barrel rolls in the middle of firefights. These bug things are having a nervous breakdown. Bob continued with obvious enjoyment. They're trying to calculate responses to tactics that don't make any mathematical sense. It's like asking a computer to divide by zero. The Vex had spent millions of years perfecting their coordination and efficiency. They had conquered countless worlds by being faster, stronger, and more organized than anything they encountered. But they had never faced an enemy that treated impossible odds like a personal invitation to get creative. The humans didn't just fight the Vex. They confused them, frustrated them, and ultimately broke their perfect hive mind simply by refusing to behave the way prey was supposed to behave. The last Vex ship went down fighting, as they all had, but by then it was fighting alone against overwhelming odds. 6 months of constant battle had reduced the seemingly unstoppable swarm to scattered remnants hiding in asteroid fields and abandoned space stations. The final engagement took place in the debris field that used to be the Vex mothership, a massive bioform the size of a small moon that had coordinated their entire invasion. Admiral Torres watched from his flagship as Captain Jake Miller's ship delivered the killing blow. The human vessel looked even more battered than it had when it first arrived, its hull scarred by countless impacts and patched with what appeared to be spare parts from a dozen different sources. But it still fought with the same relentless determination that had characterized every human engagement. The Vex ship's death cry echoed across multiple frequencies, a sound like grinding metal mixed with something that might have been electronic screaming. Then silence fell across the battlefield for the first time in half a year. The threat that had consumed dozens of worlds and brought the mighty Confederacy to its knees was finally, completely, utterly destroyed. Torres expected celebration. Victory parades, medal ceremonies, maybe a few speeches about courage and sacrifice. What he got instead was Captain Miller's voice crackling over the radio, sounding tired but satisfied. "Well, that's that. Anyone know where we can get some decent coffee around here? The stuff we brought from home ran out 3 weeks ago." The victory celebration that followed was unlike anything in Confederacy history. The humans had insisted on keeping things simple, gathering in the largest available hangar bay aboard Torres' flagship for what they called just a regular party with some new friends. They brought their own music, which was loud and energetic, and completely different from the elegant symphonies the Confederacy preferred. They also brought something called beer, which they shared freely with anyone brave enough to try it. But the real surprise came when Colonel Janet Thompson called for quiet and stepped up to address the mixed crowd of humans and aliens. Everyone expected her to announce the terms of Earth's occupation of Confederacy space, or at least demand tribute for their military assistance. Instead, she smiled and said something that stunned every non-human in the room. "Before we head home, we wanted you all to know something. We've been watching your people for about 60 years now, ever since we figured out how to pick up your long-range communications. We've seen how you handle disputes between different species, how you try to solve problems without violence, how you actually care about protecting civilians in war zones." She paused and looked around the room at the Confederacy officers who had fought alongside her people. Most species in this galaxy, when they get advanced enough to build starships, they use them to conquer their neighbors. You folks use yours to build libraries and art galleries and hospitals. That impressed us. Colonel Thompson gestured toward her crew, ordinary people with names like Steve and Lisa and Tony, who had somehow managed to save an entire civilization. "We were waiting to see if anyone out here was worth getting to know. You prove that you are." The Confederacy leadership exchanged glances, not sure how to respond to this unprecedented situation. In their experience, powerful military forces always demanded something in return for their services. Payment, territory, political concessions, something. The humans seemed to genuinely want nothing except friendship. "But surely you must want some form of compensation for your assistance." Admiral Torres ventured carefully. "Your forces have suffered casualties. Your ships have taken damage. The Confederacy owes you a considerable debt." Janet Thompson just laughed and shook her head. "Admiral, where we come from, when your neighbors need help, you help them. That's just how decent people behave." Before departing, the humans left behind several small packages containing what they described as friendship gifts. The Confederacy scientists would spend years studying the contents, try to understand technologies that seemed to violate half the known laws of physics, medical techniques that could heal injuries in hours instead of weeks, communication systems that could reach across the galaxy instantly, energy sources that produced no waste and never ran out. But the most valuable gift wasn't technological at all. It was a knowledge that somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, there existed a species that chose to use its incredible power to protect others instead of conquering them. The human fleet departed as casually as it had arrived, their battered ships jumping back toward a system most databases still listed as uninhabitable. Colonel Thompson's final message was simple and direct. Earth remembers its friends. You need help again, you know where to find us. The galaxy had gained more than just saviors. It had found protectors who understood that the greatest strength wasn't the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to know when to show mercy instead.